He bought a 13-year-old forced to serve miners, and his kindness transformed her forever. The air in the mining camp was a thick, suffocating blanket of dust and despair, a constant reminder of the raw, brutal existence Clara endured. At 12 years old, her hands were calloused beyond her years, her face perpetually smudged with grime, and her eyes held a weariness that belied her youth. She moved through the ramshackle tents and crude shacks like a ghost, a small, silent figure among the rough, unyielding men who came and went, their voices harsh, their demands endless. Clara's days were a monotonous cycle of fetching water, stoking fires, and enduring the leering glances and casual cruelties of the miners. Hope was a foreign concept, a shimmering mirage in a landscape as barren as her own future. Her world was confined to the desolate stretch of land where the earth coughed up gold and men lost their souls. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the ground until it cracked, and the nights brought a chilling cold that seeped into her bones. Every sound, every shadow, held a hint of danger, and every interaction was a negotiation for survival. Clara had learned early on to make herself small, invisible, to anticipate needs before they were voiced, anything to avoid drawing attention that might lead to further hardship. She dreamt of nothing, for dreams were a luxury she couldn't afford, a fragile thing that would only shatter in this unforgiving reality. One blistering afternoon, a lone rider approached the camp, a man unlike the others. He was lean, with a grizzled beard, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of distant battles. Silas, an ex-soldier from the recently ended civil war, dismounted with a quiet efficiency, his gaze sweeping over the scene with an unsettling calmness. He spent days observing, a silent spectre, until his eyes landed on Clara, a wisp of a girl struggling with a heavy bucket. Something in her defeated posture, the desperate emptiness in her eyes, resonated with the quiet despair in his own soul. He saw not just a child, but a ghost of the innocence that war had stolen from the world, and from him. The decision, when it came, was sudden and driven by an impulse he hadn't known he possessed. Silas approached the camp foreman, a burly man named Jebediah, with an offer that stunned everyone into silence. He wanted to buy the girl. The transaction was swift and cold, a few meager coins exchanging hands for a human life. Clara watched, numb and disbelieving, as she was traded like a piece of property. As Silas took her arm, his grip surprisingly gentle, she felt a tremor of something she hadn't felt in years, a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of possibility, a fragile crack in the wall of her endless despair. The other miners stared, some with scorn, others with bewildered curiosity, as Silas led the small, trembling girl away from the only life she had ever known, into an unknown future that stretched out like the vast, empty prairie. The silence in Silas's small, weathered wagon was profound, broken only by the rhythmic creak of the wheels and the distant murmur of the wind. Clara huddled in the corner, a small bundle of fear and confusion, her eyes darting between the passing landscape and Silas, who drove with a quiet concentration. Her mind, accustomed to the constant noise and aggression of the mining camp, struggled to comprehend this newfound quiet. The rough blanket he had given her, though coarse, felt impossibly soft against her skin, a stark contrast to the hard ground she had always slept on. Every muscle in her body was tensed, waiting for the inevitable command, the harsh word, the familiar cruelty. Silas, sensing her apprehension, spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble that was surprisingly gentle. He offered her a tin plate of stew and a cup of water, simple provisions that to Clara felt like an unimaginable feast after years of meager scraps. He didn't demand thanks, didn't leer or rush her. He simply watched, his gaze steady but not intrusive. As she ate, slowly at first, then with a hunger that surprised even herself, Clara began to notice the small details. The way Silas carefully tended to his horse, the way he meticulously packed his few belongings, the faint scar that creased his brow. He was a man of quiet habits, a stark contrast to the volatile personalities she was used to. They camped by a small, gurgling creek that night, the stars overhead, a dazzling spectacle Clara had rarely truly seen, always obscured by the campfires and the haze of smoke. Silas built a small fire, its warmth a comforting presence against the desert chill. He didn't force conversation, but instead began to hum a low, melancholic tune, a melody that spoke of distant lands and forgotten sorrows. For the first time, in as long as she could remember, Clara felt a flicker of safety, a fragile shield against the terrifying vastness of the world. She watched him, a stranger who had paid for her freedom, trying to piece together the enigma of his kindness. The next morning, Silas presented her with a small, worn book, its pages dog-eared and its cover faded. He pointed to the letters, slowly articulating their sounds, his patience unwavering. "Clara," he said, "you're free, and you're going to learn." Her eyes widened. The concept of learning, of words holding meaning, was as alien and wonderful as the idea of being truly free. A tiny seed of hope, fragile but persistent, began to sprout in the barren soil of her heart. She didn't understand why he was doing this, why he cared, but in his quiet resolve she found a strange, tentative comfort. A dawn breaking after an endless night. Their journey stretched out across the vast, untamed expanse of the American West, a landscape as unpredictable as the lives they now led. Days bled into weeks, marked by dusty trails, scorching sun, and nights under a canopy of endless stars. Silas, with a veteran's instincts, navigated the treacherous terrain, always watchful, always prepared. He taught Clara how to tie knots, how to identify edible plants, how to listen to the whispers of the wind. Each lesson was delivered with a quiet stoicism, as if imparting knowledge was as natural as breathing. And Clara, eager to absorb every scrap of wisdom, proved to be an exceptionally quick study. She learned to read the land, to anticipate danger, and, slowly, to trust the man who had inexplicably saved her. The road was not without its perils. They encountered opportunistic drifters and wary homesteaders, some curious, others openly hostile to the sight of a grizzled loner with a young girl in tow. Silas handled each encounter with a quiet authority, his hand often resting near the revolver at his hip, a silent warning to those who might consider testing his resolve. One particularly harrowing night, they were forced to take shelter from a sudden, violent thunderstorm, the sky splitting with lightning and the ground turning to mud. Clara, terrified by the deafening thunder, instinctively pressed herself against Silas, and he, without a word, wrapped an arm around her, offering a warmth and security she hadn't known since she was a toddler. It was in these moments of shared vulnerability that their unusual bond deepened, transforming from a simple guardianship into something akin to a fragile, unspoken family. During their travels, Silas would occasionally share snippets of his past, fragments of a life fractured by war. He spoke of the horrors he had witnessed, the camaraderie he had lost, and the burden of memories that still clung to him like a shroud. He never explicitly detailed his trauma, but Clara could see the shadows in his eyes, the way his jaw would clench at certain thoughts. She, in turn, began to tentatively share glimpses of her own nightmare, the years of servitude, the constant fear. These were not full confessions, but rather small, raw glimpses into their wounded souls, offered and received with an unspoken understanding. Their shared experiences of hardship, though vastly different, forged a quiet empathy between them, a silent acknowledgement of burdens carried. As the miles stretched behind them, Clara's physical appearance began to transform. Her skin cleared, her hair grew long and was often braided neatly, and a faint flush of health returned to her cheeks. But it was her spirit that underwent the most profound change. The vacant look in her eyes was slowly replaced by a spark of curiosity, a flicker of intelligence. She began to ask questions, to express opinions, no longer just a silent shadow. Silas, in turn, found himself speaking more, laughing occasionally, a sound that was rough but genuine. The quiet companionship of the girl, her unwavering trust, chipped away at the hardened shell around his heart, allowing light to seep into the darkest corners of his own solitude. After weeks of relentless travel, Silas and Clara found a temporary haven in a small, burgeoning town nestled by a river. It was a place of new beginnings, attracting settlers with dreams of prosperity and a fresh start. Silas, resourceful and skilled, found work as a carpenter, his strong hands building homes and businesses, bringing a steady rhythm to their days. For Clara, the town was a revelation. She saw women tending gardens, children playing in the streets, and a general store filled with goods beyond her wildest imagination. It was a stark contrast to the desolate mining camp, a glimpse into a world she had only ever dreamed of existing. Silas continued her lessons with unwavering dedication. In the quiet evenings, after his work was done, he would painstakingly teach her to read from a worn Bible he carried, and later, from any newspaper scraps they could find. Clara devoured every word, her mind blossoming with each new discovery. She learned about distant cities, about history, about the vastness of the world beyond her immediate experience. Her world expanded with every letter she recognized, every sentence she understood. Silas watched her progress with a quiet pride, seeing in her burgeoning intelligence the promise of a future he had once believed impossible for either of them. He taught her numbers, too, and the basics of commerce, preparing her for a life where she could be self-sufficient and independent. However, the shadows of their past, though seemingly left behind on the open road, began to stir in this new place. Silas's reserved demeanor and Clara's unusual background drew curious glances and whispered judgments from some of the townsfolk. A few individuals, recognizing the signs of a man who had seen too much war, or hearing rumors of his past as a purchaser of a child, kept their distance or openly expressed their disapproval. One particular man, a slick, self-proclaimed lawman named Jed, took an immediate dislike to Silas, fueled by a mixture of suspicion and a desire to assert his own authority in the small community. Jed's presence cast a subtle but persistent pall over their newfound peace, a constant reminder that their unconventional relationship was viewed with unease by some. One evening, as Clara was helping Silas unload supplies, a group of unruly men from a nearby ranch, drunk and boisterous, began to harass them. Jed, witnessing the scene, did little to intervene, his smirk betraying his true feelings. Silas, normally calm, felt a surge of old battlefield anger. He protected Clara instinctively, his movements swift and decisive, dispatching the men with a quiet force that revealed the hardened soldier beneath the humble carpenter. Clara watched, a mix of fear and admiration in her eyes. The incident solidified her trust in Silas, but it also underscored the precariousness of their situation. The past and the dangers it held was never truly far away, always lurking just beneath the surface of their fragile new life. The confrontation with Jed and the ranch hands, though brief, served as a stark reminder that their fragile peace in the town was threatened. Jed, humiliated by Silas's effortless defense, became more openly hostile, subtly undermining Silas's work and spreading malicious rumors. Silas, recognizing the escalating tension and unwilling to jeopardize Clara's hard-won safety, began to quietly make plans. He had always known that their journey might not end in a single, fixed place, but in a series of steps towards a more secure future. a place where Clara could truly thrive without constant scrutiny or danger. One cold morning, as the first hints of winter began to paint the distant peaks, Silas approached Clara with a map. He pointed to a small, unassuming dot far to the west, a place he'd heard whispers about, a growing community that valued independence and hard work, far removed from the petty politics of their current town. There were opportunities there, he explained, for those willing to build a life from scratch. Clara, no longer the terrified, passive child, looked at the map with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. She understood the risks, but she also recognized the promise of a truly fresh start, a place where her past would be unknown and her future unwritten. Their departure was quiet just before dawn, avoiding any further confrontation with Jed and his cronies. The journey was arduous, crossing a mountain pass battered by early snow, testing their endurance to its limits. But Clara, resilient and strong, was no longer a burden but a capable companion. She helped Silas tend to the horses, scout for supplies, and even navigated using the stars, applying the lessons he had so patiently taught her. There was a palpable shift in their dynamic. It was no longer just Silas guiding Clara, but two individuals bound by an unbreakable trust, working together towards a shared goal. They arrived in the small, burgeoning community just as spring was awakening the land. It was a place of vast, open skies and determined people, a perfect canvas for a new beginning. Silas, with his carpentry skills, quickly found work, respected for his quiet diligence. Clara, now a confident and articulate young woman, no longer hesitant, embraced her new environment. She helped Silas with his accounts, her reading and writing skills proving invaluable. She even began to teach some of the younger children in the community, her gentle nature and sharp mind making her a natural educator. The vacant despair in her eyes had been entirely replaced by a bright, hopeful spark. Silas, watching her bloom, finally found the true redemption he had unknowingly sought. His act of compassion, once a desperate gamble, had not only saved a life but had also forged a new purpose for his own, transforming both of them forever under the vast, benevolent sky of the American West.